Did you get lost on the way to the parade, Sergeant? That's what someone sneered from the gallery as the old man entered the courtroom in his wrinkled, outdated army uniform. Laughter followed. Even the bailiff smirked, but the man didn't flinch, didn't explain. He just walked to the defendant's table and placed a folded flag on the bench beside him. Then the judge looked up, stood, and with her hand on her heart said softly, "I know that uniform. I watched it save lives. If you believe some uniforms never lose their weight, comment respect below." The morning sun filtered through the county courthouse windows, casting long rectangles of light across the worn marble floor. The room buzzed with the usual Monday morning chatter, attorneys shuffling papers, spectators whispering, the bailiff's radio crackling quietly. Walter Hank Rowley stood outside the heavy oak doors, straightening his tie with gnarled fingers. At 81, his movements were slower than they once were, but no less precise. His Class A uniform, khaki wool that had yellowed slightly with age, hung from shoulders that still carried themselves with military bearing, despite the gentle curve that time had pressed into his spine. "You sure about this, Walter?" asked Ethan Wells, the young VA coordinator who'd called him as a witness. Walter adjusted the ribbons on his chest, Korea Distinguished Service Purple Heart. "If I'm speaking on the stand, I wear the truth on my chest." Ethan nodded, knowing better than to argue. The property dispute was minor in legal terms. Someone claiming the new Veterans Center expansion encroached on their land, but sacred in principle. Walter had helped build the original center in '73 when no one else cared about returning Vietnam vets. The bailiff called the court to order. Ethan entered first, Walter a few paces behind, clutching a carefully folded American flag under his arm. The courtroom was unexpectedly full. A slow day for the justice system meant this minor civil case had drawn a crowd. College students on a legal field trip filled the back row, smartphones at the ready. Local retirees occupied their usual spots, treating the proceedings like free entertainment. As Walter's polished boots echoed against the floor, the whispers began. "What is this cosplay court?" someone muttered, drawing scattered laughter. "That guy's older than the law books," added another voice. A young man with an expensive haircut leaned to his friend. "Did you get lost on the way to the parade, Sergeant?" Laughter rippled through the gallery. Even the bailiff, a young man who'd never served, failed to hide his smirk. Walter's weathered face remained impassive. 70 years of life after Korea had taught him which battles deserved his energy. This wasn't one of them. He moved with deliberate dignity down the center aisle, the flag cradled against his chest like a sleeping child. His uniform, pressed that morning with the same iron he'd used for decades, crackled slightly with each step. The plaintiff's attorney, a sharp-featured woman in a suit that cost more than Walter's monthly pension, watched his approach with barely concealed amusement. Ethan rose to greet him, gratitude and apology mingling in his expression. Walter nodded once, then carefully placed the folded flag on the bench beside his seat. His gnarled fingers lingered on the fabric for a moment before he straightened and took his place. The judge, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and practical shoes, glanced up briefly from her paperwork, then returned to making notes, apparently uninterested in the old man's entrance or the gallery's reaction. Court was called to order, and the small-town drama of property lines and easements began to unfold. The defense calls Thomas Rowley to the stand. Ethan's voice rang with more confidence than he felt. The case wasn't going well. The plaintiff's attorney, Duval, from a prestigious downtown firm, had brought surveyors and experts. Ethan had brought a VA social worker, 2 volunteers and an 81-year-old veteran in a uniform last issued during the Korean War. Walter rose slowly, each joint protesting in its own register. He made his way to the witness stand without assistance, though the bailiff stepped forward as if expecting to catch him at any moment. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth?" "So help you God." Walter's hands steadied despite his years rested on the Bible. "I do, same as I swore in '52. Ms. Duval approached her heels, clicking like typewriter keys against the hardwood floor. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Rowley," she began, emphasizing the civilian address. "Are you aware this is not a military court?" A few chuckles from the gallery. Walter nodded once. "Yes, ma'am, but I swore to tell the truth under oath, same anywhere." Judge Clara Monroe's mouth twitched almost a smile, but she let the moment pass without comment. The attorney continued, "And what qualifies you to testify on property boundaries and zoning regulations?" Walter leaned slightly forward. "Ma'am, I helped build that vet center brick by brick. Then I buried 6 friends whose names are on its memorial wall." Ms. Duval sighed theatrically. "Your Honor, I move to strike the witness's response as non-responsive and irrelevant to the property dispute. The court recognizes the witness's personal connection to the property." Judge Clara Monroe replied evenly, "But please answer the specific question, Mr. Rowley." Walter nodded. "I served on the original building committee in 1973. We work directly with county surveying. All our expansion plans followed the original property lines. Yet you have no formal training in surveying or property law, Ms. Duval pressed. No, ma'am, just 40 years of watching that place grow. The questioning continued for 20 minutes, technical questions about easements and setbacks that Walter answered simply but accurately. His composure never wavered, even as Ms. Duval's tone grew increasingly condescending. From the gallery, the college students had grown bored. One whispered loudly to another, "Someone get him a walker and a mic." Several people laughed, the judge frowned, but didn't intervene. "No further questions," Duval finally said, returning to her seat with the satisfied air of someone who just completed a minor but unpleasant task. Ethan rose for redirect. "Mr. Rowley, what would be lost if the court ruled against the Veterans Center expansion?" Walter's eyes faded blue, but still sharp scanned the courtroom. "The new wing is for younger vets. Afghanistan, Iraq. They need different things than we did: support groups, family counseling, computer training." He paused. "We promised them we'd be ready when they came home. Not like it was for us after Korea or those boys after Vietnam." "Objection, emotional appeal," Ms. Duval called out. "Sustained," Judge Clara Monroe said mechanically. Ethan nodded. "No further questions, Your Honor." Walter stood, his back straightening with military precision, despite the discomfort evident in his movement. He stepped down from the witness stand and made his way back to the defense table. As he passed the plaintiff's table, Ms. Duval whispered to her client, just loud enough to be heard, "Nice costume at least." Walter didn't break stride. He reached the defense table where the folded flag still rested on the bench. He placed a hand on it, gently smoothing an invisible wrinkle. Judge Clara Monroe happened to glance up at that moment. Her eyes fell on the flag, then traced up to the ribbons on Walter's chest. Something changed in her expression, a flash of recognition, then shock, then something deeper. She set down her pen. The court reporter, sensing a pause, looked up. The judge placed both hands flat on the bench, pushing herself to standing. "All rise," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Confusion rippled through the courtroom. Court was still in session. The bailiff hadn't made the call, but something in the judge's voice and authority beyond legal procedure had everyone rising to their feet. All except Walter, who remained seated, one hand still resting on the flag. "Not for court," Judge Clara Monroe said, her eyes locked on Walter. For him, the room went absolutely silent. "If you believe respect isn't scheduled, it's earned." Comment. Respect below. The silence held like a collective breath. 3 seconds, 5, 10, no shuffling papers, no clearing throats, not even the usual creaking of old courthouse benches. Judge Clara Monroe stepped down from her elevated position, something almost never done during proceedings. Her black robe swished softly as she crossed the space between the bench and the defense table. She stopped before Walter, who had finally risen to his feet, flag still clutched in his weathered hands. "4th Infantry Division, Korean War," she said, her voice carrying in the silent room as she gestured to the insignia on his uniform. "My father wore the same patch." Walter's eyes widened slightly, the first change in his stoic expression since entering the courtroom. "Yes, ma'am, 51 through 53. Judge Clara Monroe nodded, swallowing hard before continuing. "I was a field medic in Kandahar. Men like you trained the ones who saved me when our convoy hit an IED." The gallery remained standing now, exchanging glances, confusion giving way to understanding, embarrassment, respect. "Heartbreak Ridge?" Walter asked quietly. "Yes, my father was there too." Walter nodded. "Hard fighting." "He never talked about it," the judge said. "We rarely do," Walter replied. The bailiff, who had been frozen in place, suddenly removed his hat and held it against his chest. The college students in the back row lowered their phones. One by one, people throughout the courtroom placed their hands over their hearts. Miss Duval remained standing, but her eyes were downcast. Her earlier confidence evaporated. Judge Clara Monroe turned to face the courtroom, her judicial demeanor returning, though her voice carried new weight. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I expect a quorum appropriate to the presence of someone who has served this country with distinction." She returned to the bench, gathered her papers, and exited through the side door. The usual call of "all rise" for her departure was unnecessary. Everyone was already standing. As the room began to empty, people filed past Walter. Some nodded respectively. A few whispered apologies. The college student who had made the Walker comment approached hesitantly. "Sir, I'm sorry for what I said. My grandfather was in Vietnam." Walter nodded once, then "Honor him by remembering," he said simply. During the recess, Ethan and Walter sat quietly in the hallway. No strategies were discussed, no legal maneuvers planned. "Never seen anything like that," Ethan finally said. Walter shrugged slightly. "Respect isn't complicated, just rare sometimes." When court resumed, Judge Clara Monroe returned with a different energy. She sat, surveyed the room, now filled with a quieter, more attentive crowd, and spoke clearly. Having reviewed the evidence presented, including Mr. Rowley's testimony regarding the original property surveys, and having examined the county records during our recess, this court finds in favor of the defendant. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Ms. Duval rose to object, but Judge Clara Monroe continued. Furthermore, this court will not entertain slander against those who carried burdens others couldn't. The Veterans Center expansion will proceed as planned with all permits approved. She struck her gavel once the sound sharpened final. Court is adjourned. Outside, reporters who had caught wind of the unusual proceedings gathered around Walter, microphones thrust toward his face, questions overlapping. Mr. Rowley, how does it feel to have changed the outcome of the case? Sir, did you expect the judge's reaction? Can you comment on the disrespect shown in the courtroom? Walter shook his head gently. I already spoke where it mattered, he said, gesturing back toward the courtroom. By evening, local news carried the story. Judge stands for veteran in unprecedented show of respect. The county commissioner issued a statement supporting the Veterans Center expansion and announcing additional funding. The courthouse established a new rule. All visitors must stand when uniformed military personnel enter any courtroom, and the folded flag, the one Walter had carried so carefully at Judge Clara Monroe's request, it was placed in a display case in the courthouse lobby with a simple inscription. In this room, justice stood for him. Dawn broke pink and gold over the Veterans Center the next morning. Walter arrived at 6:30, same as always, sweeping the front steps before most people had their first cup of coffee. The autumn air carried a hint of winter, a familiar chill that always reminded him of mornings on watch in Korea. Some memories he'd learned were carried in the bones rather than the mind. He worked methodically, his broom making soft scratching sounds against the concrete. Last night's news cover he had meant nothing to his routine. The courthouse drama had already faded into yesterday's concern. As he finished, a young Marine in dress blues approached from the parking lot. The uniform was crisp, perfect, so different from Walter's weathered Class A's, yet carrying the same weight of promise and sacrifice. The Marine stopped at the bottom step, came to attention, and offered a perfect salute. Staff Sergeant Lucas Hart, sir, I heard you made court history yesterday. Walter returned the salute, habits of respect that transcended retirement or rank. Nah, he said with a small smile, just reminded them it had one. They went inside to gather the old soldier and the young one where other veterans were already gathering for morning coffee. Word had spread through military circles overnight, traveling through the invisible network that connected those who had served. No one mentioned the courtroom directly. Instead, they showed respect in the ways that mattered to Walter, pulling out his chair, refreshing his coffee without being asked, listening when he spoke even about mundane things. That afternoon, Judge Clara Monroe visited the center. No robes, no fanfare, just a daughter of a Korean War veteran paying respect to another. She brought a gift, a framed copy of the court's decision, with a handwritten note at the bottom. Some battles are fought in courtrooms. Thank you for fighting both kinds. In the weeks that followed, changes appeared, small ripples from that courtroom moment. Judges across the state began quietly displaying folded flags in their chambers. Law schools added a lecture on respecting veteran witnesses. The local bar association established a pro bono program specifically for veterans' legal needs. At the police academy, a new instructor, a retired Marine, began each class with the same word. Some uniforms may fade, but never disrespect the thread. Walter's life continued much as before. He swept the steps each morning, attended veterans' funerals, played checkers with younger vets who pretended not to let him win. 1 year later, his heart strung through war and decades of peace finally rested. Judge Clara Monroe attended the funeral in her full judicial robe, standing among hundreds of uniformed service members who came to honor a man most had never met, but all understood. Before the casket was closed, she approached and placed her courtroom gavel beside his ribbon bar. Court adjourned, she whispered, "You may rest." The honor guard folded the flag with white-gloved precision, presented it to Ethan, who had no family to receive it, and in the Veterans Center lobby beside the original building cornerstone, a new plaque appeared. Thomas Rowley, 1933-2026. He stood for us before we knew to stand for him. Subscribe to Steelheart Stories if you believe some moments of silence speak louder than verdicts. His story didn't just end with a ruling, it lived on as a symbol that honor has no expiration date. In that courtroom, in that center, and in every silent moment when someone chooses respect over ridicule, Walter Rowley still stands,